Hey everyone, Steve from Backcountry Gallery, coming to you once again from my camper. And this time around, I want to talk about shooting in bad weather, specifically shooting in rain and snow, because a lot of people shy away from this. And it's a shame because they're really missing out. It's a huge mistake to skip bad weather. I live for bad weather. Nothing makes me happier than looking at the forecast and seeing thunderstorms are coming or that's going to be a rainy day. I love to go out in the rain and get those kind of shots because they're very unique. One of the things as wildlife photographers that we're always trying to do is show our subjects in a more unique way. And rain and snow provide a very unique opportunity, actually tons of opportunities for us to do just that, to give a unique photo to the world. So let's take a look at everything you need to know. And if you hang around, I have a little bonus at the end, and I'll give you a super duper trick for when it's raining, something you have to do every time. Don't make the mistake of not doing this thing, so hang around. So first though, I have to do a disclaimer. Obviously, if you're shooting in rain, snow, any kind of precipitation, you are putting your gear at risk, so make sure you get some kind of a raincoat or rain sleeve or something for your camera and lens to keep it protected. So disclaimer out of the way, I think we're all on the same page there. Let's get started. So the very first thing we want to talk about here is volume. How much rain do we have? How much snow do we have? Because one of the mistakes I see people make when it comes to taking these kind of photos is that they try to shoot out in light rain or very light snow. And what happens is you end up, instead of seeing all this rain in the photo, what happens is you get little random specks in the photo that look like dust spots. It's raindrops coming through, but you have a little streak over here, or depending on your shutter speed, a little dot over there, and it doesn't look like anything. So you have to have a good volume. You need like a medium to heavy rain or snow event in order to really take advantage of shooting in that kind of weather. Now, too much, of course, can be a problem, particularly in snow, because sometimes it can completely obscure the subject. But for the most part, just kind of a medium heavy rain, that's what we're looking for, or like a medium snow, that's absolutely perfect. That's the kind of stuff we're looking for when it comes to volume. Next, let's talk background, because background is super important for these kind of photos. So the first thing is that you want a dark background, middle tone to dark, but preferably the darker the better. The reason for that is simple. When the rain's coming down and the snow's coming down, those are lighter colored things. The rain's going to show up as little white streaks in your photo. And if it's up against a white sky or a very light background, it's going to be very hard to notice. Or if it's up against a white sky or something and you see rain against the subject but not against the background, that looks kind of weird too. So you're looking for a dark background. The second thing we're looking for our background is we want a more distant background. Okay, we don't want a background that's right on top of our subject, because when leaves get wet, what do? They have a little reflection, they have a little shine to them a lot of times. So the rain's coming down and that's going to be kind of white, and the shine on those leaves is going to be white, and pretty soon that background's just looking more busy than interesting. So we don't want that. So we ideally want a dark, distant background for this kind of stuff. Now, snow, on the other hand, gives you a little bit more leeway here. You can go like a middle tone background and still be able to see the snow absolutely fine. Even a lighter than middle tone background, a little bit lighter than middle tone, you're still going to see the snow absolutely fine. Not going to be a problem. What you have to really be careful with snow is not to have too much brightly lit snow behind the snow that you're trying to capture and photograph around the subject. So in that case, again, you're still looking for those backgrounds. And again, dark, distant backgrounds works for everything. Next, let's talk shutter speed. And shutter speed is where the fun begins. Shutter speed allows you to control the length of the streaks when it's raining, or even the length of the streaks when it's snowing, depending on how fast the snow is blowing. But let's stick with rain for right now. What we're going to do with shutter speed is we're going to use it to control how long our little white streaks are in the photo. So longer shutter speeds, like 1/100th of a second, 1/25th, 1/60. By the way, 1/60th is my sweet spot for rain most of the time. But that's going to give you a nice, long, healthy streak. If you want more of a medium streak, you're going to look at 1/500th of a second, maybe even sort of start pushing 1/1000th of a second. If you want a shorter streak, it's going to be around 1/1000, 1/1250. And if you want to just get little dots in there, you're going to be 1600th of a second or faster, and that'll give you a little dot. And I'm not going to tell you which is best, because there is no best. It all depends on what your creative vision is for that particular photo. I have it all sorts of different ways when I'm shooting. Sometimes I have the rain stop, sometimes I have it streaked. It just depends. And sometimes we don't have much of a choice. For instance, take this cheetah photo. She was actually walking right towards the camera, so I have to settle for maybe a little less streaking here. So I have little short little streaks here in the raindrops that you can see in the photo. But the reason for that is that she was moving. It was more important to me to have her sharp than to have long streaks of rain. So it all depends on the situation and what you're trying to accomplish. But this at least kind of gives you a start. So next, let's talk snow, because that's a whole different ballgame, isn't it? Because a lot of times, like with this snowy owl right here, the snow's falling very slowly, and I'm not going to be able to shoot a slow enough shutter speed to make that work, at least not with a wildlife subject. I'm not going to be able to get any streaking in there, which is fine. A lot of times when people see snowflakes floating in the air like that, that looks more natural to them anyway. With rain, streaks look good. With snow sometimes frozen in the midair like that, it works really well. However, if you want to impart a sense of movement and you have some wind blowing that snow, you can definitely drop that shutter speed like I did with this marmot here. And you can see we have some nice streaking going on there, and it really feels like he's in a blizzard. But anyway, the big key here with shutter speed isn't so much that you're going to take a specific shutter speed away from this video. It's that you need to experiment. Start with something that seems reasonable. Like I say, if it's raining, I like 1/60th of a second, especially if I have some support for that. But as soon as I get those shots, I'll take a burst, and as soon as I'm confident I have the shots at 160, I'll drop it. I'll raise it. I'll try different looks, and I'll pick the one I like best back home on the computer. Same with snow. Experiment with different shutter speeds. Trust me, it pays dividends. Next, let's talk f-stop, specifically what kind of depth of field we're looking for. So the deeper your depth of field, the smaller your f-stop, the more raindrops you're going to have in focus, okay? So if you have a very narrow depth of field, you're only going to get the raindrops that happen to be falling in that very shallow zone right there. If you have a wider one, you're going to get all those raindrops sharp that are falling in that wider zone, okay? So that makes sense. Everyone understands how depth of field works. Now, the downside of that, though, because at first it's like, oh yeah, I could get more volume. It'll look like it's raining harder if I go with deeper depth of field. But the problem is it also sharpens your background. This is where those distant backgrounds really become important if you're trying to stop down a little bit. Because as that background gets sharper, it starts to look busier. So what I end up doing is most of the time, I like to shoot wide open. And the reason is that I generally still get enough rain on that depth of field plane. No problem. But it also tends to give the photo a little bit softer look. It's helping my background out. It's keeping that background softer so the rain's really standing out against it. But in addition, I find that a shallower depth of field tends to give it more of a soft focus look. It looks like a misty, rainy day as it's happening, where when I stop down, I don't seem to get that feeling quite as much. So that's one of the reasons, that's the main reason, in fact, I tend to shoot wide open with whatever f-stop I happen to have handy at the time with the lens that I'm using. You don't have to be precise. You don't need like f2.8 to make this work. F5.6, f4, something like that. Even 6.3 is absolutely fine. Although one quick tip before we leave our depth of field conversation here, if you are dealing with a little lower volume of rain and you want to try to get a little bit more of that streaking in there, catch a few more of those raindrops, sometimes that's a good place to kind of drop that aperture a little bit. But again, just keep an eye on those backgrounds. Next, let's talk ISO. And the truth is, it kind of is what it is. I don't worry about it too much. The thing is, most of the time I'm shooting a little bit slower shutter speed so I get some streaking, especially with a stationary animal. And the other thing is, most of the time I'm shooting wide open. So even though it's maybe a dim, dreary kind of day, I'm still getting plenty of light in there. And a lot of times my ISO isn't too bad at all. And it's usually a lot lower than you might expect for conditions like that. So I don't worry about it too much. Obviously, if it starts climbing a little bit, maybe I'm going to have to adjust shutter speed or do something different with my f-stop, depending on if I stop down or not. But for the most part, not an issue. Next, let's talk autofocus. And the first one is which AF mode, AFS, AFC, whatever, manual focus. For the most part, I use AFC. Basically, what that's going to do is it's going to continually focus and adjust focus for me. So if the animal moves a little bit or I move a little bit or whatever, those are compensated for. The other thing with AFC is that it gives us more opportunities. When we're focused on the eye of the animal, there's going to be rain or snow or something falling in front of it. And sometimes it'll focus on that instead of the eye. You'll find that the eye is a little back focused because of that. Then it'll bounce back to the eye. I like to keep AF continually engaged so I'm getting that variability. So what about AFS, right? You could lock onto the eye and it's done, right? Well, the problem is you don't know if you got a reliable lock. When you focus with AFS, maybe you got the eye, maybe you got slightly in front of it when it finally locked on. You don't know until you look at those photos and look at them closely to see if you had critical focus. With AFC, you're going to get more throwaways, but you're also getting that variability. Some of those are definitely going to be sharp. The other thing with AFS is even if it does lock onto the eye, it doesn't take much movement on your part or the animal's part for that to get knocked out of focus. So he moves his head a little like this, all of a sudden you lost critical focus. Just that little bit of movement with a telephoto lens, you lose it. So I leave it in AFC, and that's worked really well for me. Now, as far as AF areas, you have two choices. The first one is subject detection. If you have a camera that's subject detection enabled and you find that subject detection is reliably sticking to the eye. That is the big part. It has to be on that eye reliably. If it's all over the place, if it's on and off it, don't use it. But if it's sticking to it, go ahead and use it, no problem. Number 2 is single point AF. That's the one I use all the time. Basically, I make my composition, bring my single AF point to the eye, and I start focusing, and I keep focused engaged. I'm using my thumb because I use back button focus, but if you use shutter release, keep a half press. But I keep focus engaged the entire time with that single AF point on the eye. That's how I do it. It works great. It's foolproof. You don't have to worry about the camera accidentally doing the wrong thing. Now, a big mistake people make here, though, is using a larger AF area. Like if you're shooting Nikon, for instance, maybe you're trying to use wide, or if you're shooting Sony, maybe you're using one of the big zone areas or one of the larger spot areas. Don't do that. It gives the camera more opportunities to get on the wrong thing. Get as small as you can. That single point AF, that spot AF, that's what you want. Next, let's talk frame rate, because this is such a critical setting and so many people overlook this one. This is so important. So here's the thing. With frame rate, you want 2 things. You want your maximum frame rate, and you want long bursts. You want to just lay on that shutter. And there's 2 reasons for that. One, that AF variability we talked about. The longer the bursts are, the more photos you gather, the better the chance that you have something that's critically sharp on the eye. But the second reason is just as important, and that is you have falling precipitation. One of the things that happens all the time when shooting in any kind of precipitation is you get stuff in front of the animal's eye. You'll get a streak in front of the eye. Maybe it's snow, maybe it's rain, maybe it's sleet. I don't know. But you're going to get something in front of the eye in a lot of cases. Or you'll get a little bit there, and maybe you can clone it out, maybe you can't. But ideally, you want a sharp eye that's completely clear of any kind of foreground interference from the precipitation. That works great, and just don't be afraid to really shoot like 100 shots at a time. I do it all the time. And it's kind of hard sometimes because if you're like me, you're used to those quick little bursts. But that's the key to success here. Bonus time. We're going to talk about rainbows here because it's very cool to include rainbows in your compositions. So anytime you're out shooting in the rain and that sun comes out, you put that sun to your back and you look around for rainbows. That's what I do. And when you see one, you're going to start thinking about an environmental shot. Rainbows, you got to have part of that rainbow in the photo, right? So you want to make sure this is going to be a wider shot. This is going to be more of an environmental shot. And what people don't realize about rainbows is that you can move them. And that's really the key to shooting wildlife with rainbows, because take a look at this lion photo, for instance. Now, you have to actually look down there in the corner to see the lion. I did a big environmental shot with this one. We saw this rainbow in the Serengeti. We were driving along, this beautiful rainbow, one of the best I've ever seen, comes out. And as we're driving along, I'm trying to figure out where I can put this rainbow so that I can do some kind of cool environmental shot. Unfortunately, we found this lion. But the key with rainbows is that you can move them. And the way you move them is that they're going to move with you. So as you're moving, the rainbow is going to move right along with you in the environment, in the background. So you can literally drag that rainbow into position like I did with this lion shot. We just drove the car until we had the rainbow right where we wanted it, and I made sure I included the lion in the shot. Boom, we got it. Here's another example. This rainbow with this horse. This was taken just a couple weeks ago over at Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And what happened was I was shooting horses in the rain, or trying to, and this rainbow forms in the background because the sun came out. And I'm thinking, okay, the rainbow's way over there, horses are way over here. So I moved my position. I'm like running down the road trying to get into position here because I saw a gap where the horses were walking through. And I wanted to make sure that that rainbow was just coming in so that it looked like they were walking under it, just like you see in the photo here. That was the shot I had in mind. But had I just stayed put, there were no horses under the rainbow where I was. I had to actually move my position and line things up so that the rainbow was where I wanted it, and I would also catch the horse as it came through. So that's the big trick with rainbows, is that you can move them, and to keep an eye out for them, and always think environmental shots when you see stuff like that. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this is helpful. Get out there in the rain. I hope to see you out there. We'll be the only 2 out there, only 2 crazy people out there in a pouring down rain taking photos. And if you learned something here today, make sure you like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And also make sure you check out my educational materials at my site. I got a ton of stuff full of tips and tricks like this. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.